Ffarquhar Fables. Read by TARDIS9. Shipwreck Saviour. Written by Kanefan701. It was a foggy day on the island of Sodor. It was playing a big part of this winter season. Many of the trains were falling behind schedule with their work, and there had even been a few accidents as well as hold-ups on the main line. James got derailed due to thick fog after it had completely covered a red signal. Thomas took a wrong turn and ended up at the wrong station, and Edward had been sent onto the main line by mistake when the signalman couldn't see him and had mistakenly thought he was Gordon. The Fat Controller was having a very rough time with all these problems, so he decided to send fewer trains into service and keep the others in the sheds until the foggy weather had been cleared up. Most of the lines were dangerous when this kind of weather came, but it was the coastal run that proved to be most worrying. Near the docks there was a tall lighthouse that shone brightly to help ships find their way inland or to sail out into the sea. One particular night, Thomas the Tank Engine was delivering a train of fish from the fishing village to Brendam Docks. The fog was very thick, and he had to run slowly and cautiously, for danger could be lurking nearby. Just then, he heard the sound of a deep horn. It was coming from the sea in the thick horizon.
"That must be a ship out at sea that must be lost," Thomas thought to himself. "No need to worry. The lighthouse will help guide its way through this troublesome weather."
As Thomas rounded a curve close to where the high tide was, he heard the deep horn go off again. This time it was a lot closer. He looked out to the thick blanket of fog, and then, to his shock and horror, a massive passenger ship emerged, its bow heading straight for the rocks close to the lighthouse. Thomas gasped and tried to whistle out to the ship, but failed. The ship got even more closer and closer to the rocks. A collision was now inevitable. Thomas closed his eyes. But then, when he opened them, there was nothing there. The ship had vanished into thin air. Thomas was shocked and confused. He was still that way when he arrived at the docks. Salty, the dockyard diesel, was there, and saw the expression on Thomas's face.
"Ah, shiver me timbers, Thomas mate. You look like you've seen something that's made you all puzzled."
Thomas explained to Salty what he saw. The dockyard diesel was surprised, but then he uttered those fateful words.
"Hearing what you told me, matey, has reminded me of a story that occurred here a long time ago. Somewhere in the winter of 1917. 2 years before World War I came to an end, according to what all the seamen and fishermen have said," he said, and so Salty began as he told Thomas the story. It was a bitter cold winter on the coastline of Sodor. A passenger ship named after the island itself was one of the biggest ships ever built, and was capable of carrying up to a total of nearly 2,000 people. She had embarked on her 7th maiden voyage from Sodor to London to New York and back. She completed the first part of her journey, but with the weather conditions and rough seas from her departure from London, her captain was forced to divert back to Sodor. The wild weather soon died down, But then the fog rolled in. That's when the captain made a fatal navigation error. He mistook a lighthouse for another one, and it resulted in Sodor being rammed into the rocks, which glanced along her starboard side, opening a gash of 80 feet down her hull. She was mortally wounded, and she started to sink. The captain desperately tried to beach her, but that only made things worse. Sodor took on more water, and she began to list to starboard, going down bow first. The crew got the lifeboats ready and started the evacuation. The order to abandon ship was given when the ship's forecastle submerged 25 minutes after the collision. Sodor was equipped with 20 lifeboats. She was carrying 917 aboard. As the boats were being lowered as quickly as possible, Sodor sank deeper, the water reaching the bridge at a now fast rate. Rather than staying with his ship, the captain made a cowardly escape when he got into a lifeboat, according to eyewitnesses. Out of the 17 lifeboats, 11 of them were successfully launched. As the 12th one was about to be lowered, the ship rolled over and capsized, throwing everyone into the sea. The scene was a nightmare for those in the floating boats. 554 lives survived, leaving 363 to perish in the freezing water off the coast of Sodor.
Thomas gasped in awe and shock.
What happened then? He asked. In the aftermath, Salty said, finishing the story, a rescue ship came to pick up the survivors. There was no formal inquiry, but it has been recently suggested that it was mainly due to the captain not having updated charts, so that he mistook the lighthouse for another one. The captain was blamed, however, for cowardly leaving his ship and was given a 2-year suspension. It ended up costing his job. The island never had another ship for transatlantic passenger service since the loss of Sodor, when the company it served went bankrupt in 1928. As the years passed, many witnesses reported sightings of seeing a ghost ship that resembled the one that sank. In 1985, a week after the legendary RMS Titanic was discovered, the wreck of Sodor was discovered, laying upright with a list to starboard and intact 4 miles off the coast. But she had deteriorated over time. Since her discovery, many divers have gone down to explore her, until 1994, when she was officially declared as a watery grave by the survivors' relatives and families, because they said that divers were disturbing their lost one's resting place.
Oh my goodness, said Thomas as he looked down at his buffers. Now I know what I saw. But how come none of us engines ever knew about this disaster?
Because, me hearty,
Salty said.
You were all never told, since it was mostly hidden away. Even the discovery was not told to you. Even when it made front-page news in the papers in 1985, you never even noticed.
Oh, I see, sighed Thomas. 2 days passed, and the foggy weather was starting to let up. Passenger and freight traffic was slowly on the rise again, but the coastal run still posed a dangerous situation, so only Thomas, Percy, Duck and Toby were allowed on it, while the bigger engines like Gordon, Henry and James had to stay away from it. At the fishing village, Toby was shunting a short train of vans next to some fishing boats. The workmen were using old equipment, which made the progress of unloading the fishing boats slow. It took all day to get the job done. The vans were to be sent to Brendam docks to a much bigger ship, so that the fish could be sent to the mainland. Toby wanted to be the one to make the delivery, but instead, Thomas and Percy were ordered to. Just then, Dup puffed in with some worrying news.
The weather reports say there's going to be a strong gale around 5:18 p.m, he said. It sounds bad, and the coastal run is going to take a direct hit. By the time that happens, the area will be closed until the storm dies out.
Toby, Percy and Thomas were very concerned.
We'll have to try and speed things up if we can,
said Percy worryingly.
I wouldn't want to be caught up in that storm.
We'll do what we can,
said Toby.
That's all I can say.
As the time ticked by, the work of getting the train loaded up started. At around 3:02 p.m, the loading was completed. Thomas and Percy were to pull the train to the docks together, due to the load being very heavy. They set off at 3:42 p.m, and headed out to the coastal run. However, the weather predictions were wrong, for the strong gale winds arrived much too early. The wind pelted the coastline of the railway, and high tide started to damage the track that ran along it. The lighthouse that shone brightly was used once again to help and prevent ships in the area to stay well clear of the shores. When Thomas and Percy reached the most dangerous part of coastal track, they made the bravest decision ever. They were going to cross it and try and make it to the other side despite the fierce storm. They struggled with all their might as they felt the gale winds blow against them.
We've got to make it! We've got to make it!
Huffed Percy.
We're going to make it! We're going to make it!
Puffed Thomas. The two tank engines continued their brave crossing along the wet rails. They could see the lighthouse as they rounded the bend. It was here where the storm reached its most dangerous point. Then there was trouble. As Thomas and Percy finished rounding the bend, the light in the lighthouse suddenly went out. Its fuse had blown.
Bust my buffers! Cried Thomas. The lighthouse has gone out! I saw that too! Percy shouted out. Now the ships in the area will not be able to see how far or how close they are to the island until it's too late!
Then there was more trouble. As the two tank engines puffed on, the points ahead of them had been set in the wrong direction due to the strong gale-forced wind, which led to an old pier. Thomas and Percy had no idea that they were heading for disaster. Suddenly, there came a loud, deep tone that sounded like a ship's horn. It was so loud that it caused Thomas and Percy's drivers to apply their brakes hard on, so hard that when they screeched to a standstill, the train ahead of them continued on until it broke through the buffers and fell, smashing into the sea below.
Bouncing buffers!
Wailed Percy.
What on earth was that we just heard? It seemed like some sort of ship, Thomas said. Or even a foghorn.
But Thomas was wrong. When the storm started to subside, he saw what looked like a ship. A passenger ship. And it looked like the same one Thomas saw days ago. Then it slipped into the darkness. Percy didn't even notice, because he was too shaken up. Thomas soon remembered about the story of the sunken ship that was named after the island itself.
Perhaps it was the ghost of that ship that saved me and Percy,
he thought to himself. He didn't know it until later on, but he was correct. The following day later, when the storm had finally passed, villagers at the fishing village held a special party for Thomas and Percy, hosted by the Fat Controller. "You two were very brave," he said. "Even though that was a freak storm that hit our island, you made a brave effort to finish your job to get the fish delivered."
We still have no idea who it was that saved us though, sir,
Percy said.
I think so,
Thomas said, and he told everyone about the sunken ship that Salty had told him about. Once he finished his story, everyone was mostly amazed, while others were spooked or too stunned. The Fat Controller then had an idea. Since that shipwreck is only 4 miles away from the coastline and lies in waters shallow enough for divers, we should place a memory plaque on it to show our respects to it and to the lost souls that died and to the people who survived, he suggested.
That would be a great idea, Thomas said. It will bring a peaceful closure to the families and relatives of the lost ones and survivors.
A few weeks later, the wreck of Sodor was rediscovered. It made headline news around the island 24 hours later. The sunken ship was in bad shape because she had deteriorated more since she was last visited in 1994. After the memory plaque was made, it was taken to the wreck via submarine a few days later. The Fat Controller, with the remote control panel, placed the plaque on the bow of the ship. He took his top hat off and gave the salute with respect. Thomas and Percy sounded their whistles 10 times in the style of a 10-bell salute. The wreck of Sodor is now at peace. Her story can be told to the younger generations of ship fans. But the telling of her saving Thomas and Percy on that stormy night on the coastal run was never told, for the 2 tank engines wanted that to be kept in secret. However, whenever Thomas or Percy stop at the old pier that they nearly fell off from, they always give a minute's silence to pay their respects to the lost passenger ship that went down on that cold and freezing winter night in 1917.